Hi there. Here at Sax, we're often asked about the differences between a Yamaha student and Yamaha intermediate saxophones, and it can often seem a bit of a mystery to many. So today I thought I'd go on a journey with you and try and unpack the differences, specifically between the YTS 280 and the YTS 480. So let's get started. So here I have the 280, and then on the stand behind me I have the 480. Now, before we really get into this, one of the key things to note with Yamaha is that even with their entry-level instruments, if you like, the 280 and the 480, they do not compromise on the quality of their design, the manufacturing, the components used. So, for example, the engineering tolerances on this instrument are excellent, really refined, and very similar to that of what you would find with their higher spec instruments. And before we even talk about the 480 sax, I should point out that the 280 is such a well-regarded sax amongst the teaching fraternity. It's been on teachers' lists for decades. So we're already setting the bar pretty high with the 280. So it's going to be interesting to see what extra gains we can make with the 480. So I thought I would just start this whole thing by actually doing a bit of a spot the difference between the two instruments, just to physically point out what the differences are between the two models before we talk about the tone and intonation and these various other things. So let's start from the bottom of the sax, the bell, and work up to the crook. So on the 280 here, you can see the bell is very plain. There's no engraving. It's just a straightforward gold shiny bell. Whereas on the 480 to my left here, we've got, even though it's a rather basic one, nonetheless, it is an engraving of some form. And then moving round to the bow section, with the 280 here, we've got just a standard bow section, which is glued here at this point and this point, whereas on the 480, it's actually got these two screw sections here, which allows the bell to be detached. We call it a detachable bell, essentially. Moving further up the saxophone, we have got this bell-to-body brace here on the 280, which looks like this, whereas on the 480, it's just a little bit more arty-farty. It's got a hole in the middle. Doesn't particularly do a great deal, but in terms of just a sort of design feature, it's a way of telling apart the two instruments. And then as we move up to the middle part of the sax and the table keys, we've got something a little bit more fundamental going on here. So on the 280, the design of the low B-flat key is slightly different from the B-flat key on the 480, where it has this sort of lip section on the B-flat, just giving you a little bit more comfort perhaps, or a different feeling with the left-hand pinky. But crucially, on the 480, we have this connection piece between the B-flat and the C-sharp, just allowing us to maneuver between those two keys slightly more easily. And then a slightly more noticeable thing, on the 280 here we have this button-style aux F key, whereas on the 480 we've got the teardrop shape aux F key that we will see on the higher level instruments that Yamaha do, so the 480, 62, and various other saxophones as well. And then more on to the crucial bit, the bit that for me really separates these instruments in terms of having something meaningful to talk about, and that is the crook or the neck. So we have the standard neck on the 280, which does a great job. It's the C1 neck, I believe. But as we move on to the 480, we have got a design of crook that actually comes from an original model of 62. So it's sort of designed down from the 62. It's not the current 62 neck, but nonetheless, it is a design that was used on a prior Yamaha 62 model. So I believe, I would estimate that that's where we're really going to see differences, if there are any differences. So we shall find out shortly. So you just heard me demonstrating the intonation on both saxophones, and the conclusions of that particular test were that really the intonation is practically identical, which is kind of what I'd expected initially, because I was initially pointing out to you that we've got these little differences running up and down the saxophone. And the major factor that I would expect to kind of govern a difference in intonation would be that of the neck design, the fact that they have different necks. But it's not really making a discernible difference in the intonation. But it's always important to do these tests because often it's overlooked. We talk about the tone and the mechanics and the feel, but intonation is so crucial on any instrument. And I should say, just at this point, whilst we're talking about intonation, that the intonation on both of these instruments is excellent. Yamaha really do a great job when it comes to setting the pitching of all of their instruments. That's from the student instruments all the way up to the pro instruments. Now, just as a little aside from this video, I just want to spare a word on why you should buy your saxophone from us. And let's start by talking about the all-important saxophone setup. So vital when we're talking about these complicated beasts. It's no good just getting a saxophone out of a box and expecting it to play. And unfortunately, there's one too many warehouse shifting, box shifting operations out there, and that is not us. We pride ourselves in spending a lot of time on making sure each saxophone is in tip-top working order. Stock availability, also something that we pride ourselves in doing a good job of. We like to make sure we have all the models represented by all of the brands, and it's so important, particularly if you want to come down to the store and try one model against another. After sales, also vitally important. Now, everyone who works here at Sax, they're all sax players, they're all experts and can give you the advice that you need to reassure you that you know what you are doing. So very vital, and particularly if you run into bother later down the line, we'd be more than happy to talk to you if you just reach out to us and pick up the phone. Now, back to the video. So having established that these two instruments are mechanically very, very similar, it really does come down to the tone. And as I've demonstrated there, trying to give you a flavor of two different tone types, a slightly quieter kind of playing, and then I pushed some more air through it to see if I could draw out some differences in the instruments. What I'm concluding is that the two instruments are very similar when it comes to their tone production and response. There's microscopic differences there, and I'm going to try and explain them to you. What I feel with the softer style of playing is that they are very, very similar. And even though I'm feeling some differences of resistance, because they are, after all, two different instruments, it's not enough to really commit to a camera to say that there's something going on when we play in the sort of softer sphere. But when I push the air through the instruments, what I noticed with the 280 being a lighter design of instrument is that the sound can thin out a little bit. So we get this sort of brighter, slightly lighter sound on the 280. You know, it's really excellent for that initial response when we're playing more quietly in the sort of mid-level volumes. That's what the 280 does great. But when we really push the air through it, it does thin out a little bit. On the 480, even though that thinning effect still occurs, I find that there's a little bit more weight behind the sound. Just a tad. Whether this comes across to you guys via the filter of YouTube, you can be the judge of that. But I can only really put that down to the difference in the neck design, because it's not as if any of the rest of it is going to do anything. You know, for example, the connection between the bell and the body and all that sort of thing. Let's not beat about the bush. That will not particularly affect the tone in any meaningful way. But the neck being at the business end of the sound channel, as it were, is going to make a difference. And that is the key difference, really, between these two instruments. Now, as is becoming clear, it's becoming difficult for me to find any meaningful differences between these two instruments. But let's not lose sight of the fact that they're both excellent instruments, regardless of the fact that we're not finding those differences. So let's actually talk about some of the similarities between these two instruments and celebrate some of that. So the 280 and the 480 both enjoy having their posts soldered directly to the body, which just gives it that lightweight design. And what's crucial about a lightweight design, particularly for the learner players out there, is that the sound gets going very easily. It's very responsive. So if you're a beginner and you don't have the same amount of puff as a more experienced player, you'll find a Yamaha, whether it be a 280 or a 480, really good in that department. Keywork. Let's talk about the design of the keywork, or the general feel of the keywork. It's very slender and therefore just feels very easy under the fingers. There's nothing sticking out, protruding, that you have to work your hands around, because it is all very close to the body. Not so much of a problem for someone like me. I've got fairly large hands and can handle most saxophones. But if you are a younger learner, for example, you'll find the 280 or the 480 very good from that point of view. Let's just talk about the price for a moment, because we have to respect the fact that there is a fair bit of difference between the price of the 280 and the 480. And as we've established here, there's not a whole load of difference in terms of the sound output and the mechanics. We're talking basically much the same design. So it does kind of put the question in your head, is it worth paying that amount more for 480, albeit it's an excellent saxophone, as we've established, when perhaps you could look to other options? You know, in Yamaha terms, you might look at spending a little extra and getting a 62. Without going into too much detail about the 62, there's some obvious excellent advantages that we feel and perceive from a playing point of view when we play the 62. But then there's also other brands that you might want to consider in that price range, where perhaps you might find you get other aspects in the sound, perhaps a little more interest in the tonal character that we might be lacking in the Yamaha. It's often one of these criticisms, perhaps unfairly made, of Yamahas, that the sound can be a little bit neutral and boring and blank canvas. You could also argue that the blank canvas sound thing is a good thing, because it allows you to impart your own sound on the instrument rather than have it sort of pre-coloured for you, as it were. But at the same time, people still do like an interesting and characterful sound, and we do find that with perhaps other brands. So it does move us into this whole area of, if we're looking at the 480 as an option to go for rather than the 280, then perhaps you do want to start looking at whether there's other saxophones around that area that could pique your interest in other areas. For example, a different look at the tone, as mentioned. Now, as ever, the ideal circumstance is for you to come down to the store and test these instruments out for yourself and find out what you think. But if you cannot do that, hopefully this video has been somewhat useful for you. Certainly been a learning experience for me just to really pin down what those differences are between these two excellent saxes from Yamaha. So with that, I bid you farewell, and I shall see you on another video soon.